Hello and welcome to Outburst. I'm Glenn McGuinness. This week, Toronto honored those who were killed and injured in a random attack on April 23rd.
To the people crying for relief, we will be God's instruments of peace.
I love Willowdale and I love the people here. We are like a family.
The random violence that killed 10 people and injured 16 others shook the community of Willowdale.
I live just down the street, and this is my old running route, and this could have been any of us. And I honestly couldn't work. I couldn't do anything today, so.
And left questions for our elected officials.
Mr. Speaker, we have heard that the attack in Toronto may have been inspired by the misogynistic and hateful movement incels. We must acknowledge that attacks from these groups are a form of violence rooted in misogyny. We must believe women and end the hate that they face on and offline.
I asked people here in Ottawa how safe they feel from random attacks. Here are a few of their answers.
I've always followed the whole incel thing online. It's something that's been going on for a really long time, and now that it's out in the public eye, I think that's a really good thing. And I think, you know, people need to start taking a look at what people do when they're anonymous on the internet, and you know, maybe try to improve each other's safety.
Well, I just should admit that I just noticed the big van just going down the street there when I was crossing the road, and for a second I just thought, oh, just caution, you should just look at this van and just make sure it's not doing something wrong. I've never thought like that before, I would say, but also since I come from Europe, and there have been some like terrorist attack in Paris, in Nice before, so we've been already terrified by this, but I was just sort of sure it will never cross the ocean to Canada, which it did. So, well, it is frustrating and it's scary, but I just hope that it was not a terrorism attack, that it was just like an incident, but has nothing to do with the global terrorism network.
It's exactly what you said, the operative word, random. It's a big country. We have a lot of different communities, and this is, as tragic as it is, it was one community in a very isolated sense. I don't feel compromised in any way. I feel safe at large events when I see the dump trucks and the large barricades in the way to keep people protected from vehicles. But on a daily basis, on the side of the street like we are now, I don't feel compromised in any way.
You know, you walk down the street every day, and you never think that something like that could happen. So even walking around, it's kind of in the back of your mind that something like this could happen at any given time.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I feel totally safe walking around anywhere, actually, or going anywhere. I think this is just a 0.00001 chance, so I'm not afraid.
Pretty unsafe, and when the whole thing happened, it was like really unsettling. Yeah.
So here in the streets of Ottawa, why don't you feel safe?
Like it could happen here, right? Like there's nothing stopping it from happening here. Yeah.
Is it something you think about all the time?
I mean, it's not keeping me up at night, but it's definitely like when I'm walking down the street, I'm like, gotta keep my head up, right?
Well, I feel very safe from random acts of violence because I've worked and lived in all different parts of Canada and the world, and I think the biggest signs we have to look for are mental illness, and that individual who drove the van had signs that someone should have noticed a few years ago, and it's just so tragic. But it's a random act, but we need to be better at identifying mental illness.
Honestly, fairly safe. If I can be completely honest, I feel like statistically speaking, you can go about your day. You shouldn't change your routines because of things like this. Like, I mean, it's a pretty safe place overall. Yeah.
You feel safe in the nation's capital?
I do. Yeah, I would say I do.
I feel pretty safe, or I wouldn't be out running around. You know, I pray it doesn't happen to me. You know, you can't stop living. You know, so yeah. All you can do is pray for your health and safety.
Sure.
It's about the same to me. I feel pretty safe. Of course, I'm from Florida, but I live inland in the country, so it's really safe there. Yeah, I feel safe here in Canada too.
Greenhouse gas emissions, which is associated with the burning of fossil fuels, has often been to blame for climate change by trapping heat in the atmosphere and making the planet warmer. 2 years ago, Canada, Mexico, and the U.S. made a commitment to cut emissions 40 to 45% below 2012 levels by the year 2025. On April 26th, the federal government also released national regulations aimed at cutting emissions and meeting those goals. It includes new jobs in the clean energy sector and cutting carbon pollution by 20 million tons per year. But are they going about it the right way? Our question. What is the best way for the federal government to cut greenhouse gas emissions?
Okay, so when I wrote my letter to the Prime Minister about the oil sands, basically just to get rid of them. They produce so much waste, it's ridiculous. Like, everything they do, from transportation to how they get it, to the mining, to the destruction of forestry, just everything, that's how they should cut down, is to get rid of the oil sands in Alberta.
I'd say incentivizing more options for insulation and greener homes instead of using a carbon tax to punish people. Incentives will get people, motivate people more to be green and be environmentally minded, because you get more flies with honey than you do with vinegar.
Just like promote more taxis, that's it. That's it.
So
I mean, like lower the amount of cars on the roads and just more public transport and like the LRT, these are the best ways.
Yeah, so less cars on the road, you think?
Yep, perfect. Like in areas like downtown, so like cars, like they stay more on lights, so they emit more gases, like especially on red lights in downtown areas like these. Yeah. So if Canada is growing, like the cities like Ottawa are growing, like as compared to Toronto, so I think that less amount of cars and more amount of taxis or public transport, that could help.
I would say tariffs on business.
Okay. Why do you say
that? Because they're probably the biggest polluters rather than individuals.
Okay, sir, what about yourself?
Invest in alternative modes of transport, so get people out of cars, on bikes, things like that.
I think with that it has to come from controlling vehicle use and controlling gas use. I would say, well, with gas use I mean like appliances such as refrigerators, air conditioning systems. Well, they should be regulated more, because those do cause a lot of greenhouse emissions, more than what people actually understand. So I feel like controlling that and how people use that will take a long way towards controlling greenhouse gas emissions.
I'm a fan of carbon tax. Don't know why, but it just seems like it's a good idea.
Well, it's specific to where you live. Here we're doing a pretty good job in some ways. In other ways, we could be doing a little more. But it really does have to be province specific. I don't think there's any clear-cut way that they can slap on and say that it's fine. I think they really do need to listen to the specific province concerns and go from there.
Well, first of all, get rid of the carbon tax. Again, another stupid tax on the people for no potential gain. There are probably many things that can be done in terms of, converting these kinds of things to natural gas, promoting fracking, as opposed to subsidizing the tar sands extraction, which again is dirty gas, highly toxic environmental costs, whereas fracking and the extraction of natural gas would be much, much less toxic to the environment. I don't think there's much we can do. We live in a cold environment. We need fossil fuels, and I think prancing around the world sort of pontificating about how we're so great here is just a lot of government liberal BS.
The best way would be incentives for renewable energy, incentives on solar-powered roofs, incentives for electric vehicles. I don't fully understand the carbon tax. That's a little bit complicated. I think that we need things that the public can understand, and tax credits and other incentives that are simple. I think that's what we need, and that'll do it.
Well, I'm not against the carbon tax. I think people should use their cars less, you know, and just do little things, and they all add up in the end.
The hottest temperature ever recorded in Canada occurred in which province? Saskatchewan, Ontario, or PEI?
Ontario.
Ontario.
I'm guessing Saskatchewan.
PEI.
PEI.
Ontario?
We'll go with Saskatchewan.
Ontario.
Yeah, Ontario, for sure.
Ontario?
I'm going to say Saskatchewan.
My friend, it is Saskatchewan. Very good.
Yeah.
On July 5th, 1937, the hottest temperatures ever recorded in Canada occurred in Yellowgrass and Middale, Saskatchewan. On this day, the mercury hit 45 degrees Celsius or 114 degrees Fahrenheit. It's a record that remains unbroken more than 8 decades later. Although Canada is considered one of the wealthier nations on Earth, many of us, including a significant number of our Indigenous population, are impoverished. Statistics Canada says 4.8 million Canadians live below the poverty line. And the Canadian Mental Health Association estimates that on any given night, 35,000 Canadians across the country are homeless and on the streets. We sent our cameras out to ask Canadians what ideas they may have to bring these numbers down. Our question: what is the best way to reduce poverty in Canada?
Well, I'd say we just move money away from other areas. I know it's an unpopular answer, but really, if we fix poverty, if we really get people off the streets, out of homeless situations, they are contributing to the economy then. Once they can be productive, like in society with our help, they make society better. So just really, it's just boots on the ground and money, like money in the projects that will help them.
Straight away, it's more taxes for the rich, and like normal taxes for the middle class, and like least amount of taxes for the poor.
Yeah.
So just grab whatever the rich are earning, like to help the poor, not for like grabbing taxes, to help the poor. That could help. That could help. Like there are numerous of choices, but this is, according to me, could be the choice for now.
Once again, I think it all has to do with incentive. You can't just, you know, like an easy answer would be like, you know, give out money, but there's no point in doing that, in my opinion, because it needs to, you need to make people understand how to, you know, earn money, how to get money, how to manage money and everything. So I think first thing would be education. It'll take a long time, but it's just something that needs to happen. There needs to be financial education, which there currently kind of isn't, unless you really want to be in the field. But so yeah, so there needs to be more passion to actually do a great job, and that will basically be enough to get you over a poverty line at least.
I think ultimately it's got to come from just the cost of living, and somehow we need to get them lower.
Try and reduce the amount of waste that's happening at the stores and that, to see if we can divert that to, you know, food centers and places that need them.
In the 1970s, Canada experimented with a guaranteed annual income. It was tried in Manitoba, and for political reasons, the program wasn't advanced. I think we could, you know, it's a view I've taken a long time in my life to come to, but I really think that a guaranteed annual income is the way to go. It would remove EI, it would remove virtually all the kinds of wedge subsidies that we give to people to create, you know, anti-poverty campaigns. We get rid of most of the Canada Assistance Plan stuff. We get rid of student loans. We get rid of a whole layer of bureaucracy, and it can be run directly through CRA. It doesn't require a Phoenix plan. It just requires a tinkering of OAS and CPP to get into that business and provide Canadians with a basic annual income, and it would help a lot to do with disparity. You could structure it for people in the north, for example, where food is so expensive, poverty is so high, perhaps have a higher rate of income there. and deal with inner city poverty. I think that's probably the only way we're going to cope with it, and get out of social engineering. You know, people have to make decisions for themselves, and you give them the money. If they live on the street, well, that's their choice. But you know, get out of social engineering and a lot of wedge issues and guaranteed annual income. The only way to go.
I think we need to upgrade social programs and training especially, and try to make it possible for those who are able to work to do so and to earn a living wage, which is sometimes pretty difficult now even for those who are fully employed in certain occupations.
Yeah, I think, well, going to Vern's comment about the training, I would say, I think a lot of people who are really, you know, at a very low income need some guidance on food preparation and, you know, how to sort of make, you know, get bargains on things. But I mean, of course, they need to have the money and support for that. I know it's a tough, it's a depressing, you know, situation. Yeah.
Which province is home to the oldest English language university in Canada? Ontario, New Brunswick, or Nova Scotia?
Nova Scotia.
Nova Scotia.
Ontario.
New Brunswick.
Nova Scotia.
Ontario.
New Brunswick.
New Brunswick, I think.
Nova Scotia.
I think Nova Scotia. I'm gonna say New Brunswick.
It's New Brunswick.
Oh, okay. One for me.
The University of New Brunswick was established in 1785 and holds the distinction of being the oldest English language university in Canada. At the end of the Revolutionary War, Loyalists leaving the newly formed United States realized that options for higher education in the colonies would now be limited to whatever was available in the U.S., and that education would be based on principles contrary to the British Constitution. Sending students overseas to study in England would also be extremely expensive. So they petitioned New Brunswick's first Lieutenant Governor Thomas Carleton to allow them to create an academy or school of liberal arts and sciences. It would go on to become the University of New Brunswick and is the oldest English language university in Canada. Everyone knows a good education is important, but the costs associated with that could leave much of our younger generation mired in debt for years. The average tuition for an undergraduate degree is $6,600 and $7,000 for a graduate degree. What you choose to study will, of course, have an outcome of what you pay overall. We ask Canadians how students can get some relief. Our question: how could post-secondary education be more affordable?
Well, that would just be the government stepping in, I guess, for that, and possibly these institutions lowering their tuition fees and maybe cutting back on, I guess, the wages of the higher-ups and making it more accessible and less expensive for people who can't afford it.
Yeah, it can be darn expensive. So I know that all the universities are asking alumni for contributions and they always look for funders. So that's pretty challenging, but more attention to cost of housing and not penalizing people for getting from point A to point B, I think, are really good places to start.
I like the idea of you still having to pay for your education, whether that's through a loan or a grant of some sort, but the idea of a quote-unquote free education doesn't really play into it for me. I like the idea of having to work for your education, but there's definitely a cutoff of some low-income families who might be helped with a subsidy of some sort. I like the idea our provincial government here instituted mostly grants as opposed to loans for payback. So you still end up paying back, I think it's 30% of what you were given as your student loan versus the grant kind of just helps pay for it without being paid back. I think something along those lines, especially for low-income families, but realistically, especially here in the province, I'm fairly certain we have one of the lowest tuition rates for post-secondary education. So if other provinces are managing to get by, I can't see why we would have to change anything here.
Yeah, free. Why not? You know, tuition costs are huge. Well, look what's happening in the States with, you know, DeVos and all that. So they're privatizing everything. So it's cash grab, basically. It's just chop shop in the United States, I think, is what those guys are up to. So sure, there should be charter schools and private schools and opportunities and that sort of thing. I came out of the public school system and I worked out fine. So, you know, different choices are good. But yeah, just beware of quality education. And, you know, I think consumer awareness is probably the key to that.
I don't know, my daughter's in post-secondary, so again, it's probably just scale it to household incomes a little better. You know, obviously those that have money don't need the privileges that those that don't. So yeah, probably just maybe a review of how it's scaled out.
If I were to talk about post-secondary, I would say, why don't we ramp up trade schools, vocational schools, colleges, certificate programs? Sometimes these are actually really the things that get people jobs and get people learning and exploring things. Like sometimes it's not always the degree programs, you know. And I think that's where we fall down. We're like, oh, well, let's get everyone having a bachelor's or master's degree. No, that's absolutely not the answer. So, I mean, if they were to talk about post-secondary, I think maybe it would be something, you know, they should focus more on the vocational trade stuff, like, you know, some of the stuff that's not really talked about as much.
I think post-secondary education is probably sold as being a way to wealth and benefits that it isn't always. I think some people should be taking more vocational training, and I think post-secondary vocational training should be encouraged more so people have more trades. I think that perhaps everyone up to the age of 21, as again happens in Finland and Spain and other places, should have free access to education, and I would like people to spend a little more time deciding what they want to learn before they go off and do it.
I have no idea, because again, somebody's got to pay for that. If you want to tell people, yeah, okay, you know, everybody can go to college free, someone's got to pay the professors. The professors aren't going to take a cut in pay. It's really not as simple as people think it is. So I really don't have an answer. If I did, I'd be a politician.
When people go to the polls, they're often voting for the party or candidate which best reflect their morals, values, and beliefs. During an election campaign, election promises often reflect on the change people want to see in government. But when in power, at times, the governing party could fail to meet that balance, and it could end up costing them in the next election. So when it comes to like-minded thinking, how does the Trudeau government's line of thinking work with you? Our question. How does the federal government's priorities stack up against yours?
I think our immigration issues should be a priority. To do it properly, we do have room for more. And we should be careful how it's presented, so it's presented properly. Because we're a large country and we only take in a few of the millions of dispossessed people. So I think we can do better, and I think the Liberal government is aware of that. But it's the control, of course, because it worries people when they have a small vision of what's happening. So maybe that would be my issue at the moment.
Priorities. I mean, really, we just got to get a handle on the debt. We seem to be doing nothing but paying debt and raising taxes, so just get a handle on it.
I like Scheer, but you know, I don't really like the Feds. You know, the federal Liberals' priorities right now. They seem really distracted on stuff that does not matter. Virtue signaling. You know, like they go to negotiations with the Americans on NAFTA. And they're talking about, you know, human rights and the environment, and they're getting owned by the Americans, owned. Like the Americans take no prisoners. Like it's all about economics. You know, we should be talking about lowering tax rates. We should be talking about protecting intellectual property. All the stuff that anyone who's examined the issues at all talks about.
Well, I think as an Albertan, I'm a bit worried that not enough has been put on the importance of the economy and pipelines and cooperation between provinces. I worry that the provinces aren't cooperating enough, and I think we're being abused as by outside interests sometimes, whether they're lobbying interests on environmental parties or whether they're foreign governments that don't want us to achieve our potential. I think overall the federal government does a reasonably good job, but I think doctrine for each party is a problem, and parties can be an issue.
I feel like they're pretty on par with where I'm at in my life with the young kids that I have and what my priorities are at, but that changes yearly, and that changes as your kids get older and as you get older, and times change in your life. But right now, I think they're doing okay.
I can't say in every realm. I think in healthcare, we're not always aligned. That's largely provincial, but there are some complicated federal and provincial issues there. I think when it comes to social services, their basic ideas are sound. The implementation doesn't always come through the way I'd like to see. Again, I think more global support for things like universal childcare, school-age childcare would be very helpful across the country.
Almost completely inversely, I would imagine. I don't see a need to fight against paying veterans in court the same way I don't see a need to fight against somebody who had their human rights violated as Omar Khadr did. So I think they're pretty much the same type of deal, and I don't know why a federal government would fight one and kind of settle with the other. Even things like pot legalization, I think they kind of took the easy way out by just saying, it's legal. Now each province, you decide every single parameter and the like. So stuff like that, I think they're kind of just sweeping it under the rug and passing the buck off to the provinces. I would have liked to seen a more strong backbone approach from the federal government and make it a blanket policy for all Canadians to have to abide by, but that's just my opinion.
I'm supportive of the federal government, the Liberal Trudeau government. I think they're doing a lot of right things. I'm worried about the far right, the Conservatives. I'm not easy with some of the things they talk about, some of the homophobia, some of the racism stuff that they get on with is worrisome to me. And I'm afraid for what's going to happen in Ontario, for example, if they elect Doug Ford. I don't know. I don't like where the country's going. I'm comfortable with what our Liberal government's doing now. I think they're in tune with what most Canadians want.
Who holds the title of longest serving Canadian Prime Minister? Sir Wilfrid Laurier, Jean Chrétien, William Lyon Mackenzie King. Laurier, Chrétien, Mackenzie King.
Chrétien. Laurier.
Mackenzie King.
Yeah, Mackenzie King.
So Wilfrid Laurier?
Chrétien.
Mackenzie King, I think.
I also think it's Mackenzie King.
Mackenzie King.
Yeah, it's Mackenzie King, I think.
It's Mackenzie King.
Oh yeah, 1 out of 3.
William Lyon Mackenzie King was Canada's longest serving Prime Minister at 21 years, 154 days, non-consecutively. That's all for this episode of Outburst. Like what you see? Well, you can watch more full episodes on our website at www.cpac.ca, and you can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube simply by searching for CPAC, and also on Twitter at CPAC_TV. You'll find lots more great material there, and you can weigh in on the issues that matter to you the most. I'm Glenn McGuinness, and on behalf of all my colleagues at the Cable Public Affairs Channel, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time on Outburst.